Kwame was a young farmer who worked hard every day to provide for his family. One afternoon, he went to the village market and bought a strong-looking goat. He thought it would bring more life to his farm and provide milk for his wife and children. But from the very moment he brought the goat home, something about it felt different. The animal refused to eat anything he offered. No matter how much grass or cassava leaves Kwame placed in front of it, the goat only turned its head and stared directly at him. Its eyes were not like the eyes of any normal animal. They looked sharp, deep, and strange, almost as though they carried secrets from another world. At first, Kwame tried to ignore it. He thought maybe the goat just needed time to adjust to its new home. But the longer he looked at it, the more unsettled he became. The goat never blinked when its gaze met his. It followed his movements around the yard, lifting its head whenever he passed by, as if it knew him in a way that made his skin crawl. Even at night, when Kwame went to check on the animals in the pen, the goat was awake and still staring. He could feel its eyes in the dark, glowing faintly under the moonlight. His wife, Adwoa, laughed at him when he told her. She said he was only tired from work, but Kwame knew what he felt. The goat was no ordinary creature. It seemed to carry something inside its silence, something that wanted to speak but chose only to watch. Each day, Kwame's uneasiness grew heavier, and though he tried to convince himself it was all in his imagination, a quiet fear began to settle in his heart. He did not know why, but the goat's presence felt like the beginning of something he was not ready to face. The next morning, Kwame carried a basket of fresh cassava leaves and dry corn to feed the goat. He hoped that by now the animal would finally eat something, but as he placed the food in front of it, the goat only lowered its head and then slowly raised its eyes back to him. This time, Kwame felt something different. The eyes were not just staring blankly, they seemed to move, as though the surface of the black pupils carried hidden waves. He frowned and leaned closer, trying to understand what he was seeing. At first, it looked like nothing more than shadows shifting in the morning light, but then the shapes began to take form. The patterns twisted and stretched, as though the goat's eyes were alive with writing no human hand had drawn. Kwame's breath caught in his chest. He blinked hard, thinking he was only imagining it, but when he opened his eyes again, the movement was still there. The lines inside the goat's eyes stretched into curves, then bent into sharp corners, almost like letters forming in water. He leaned so close he could feel the warmth of the animal's breath. The goat did not move away, nor did it blink. It only kept its gaze fixed on him, allowing the strange markings in its eyes to shift more clearly. Kwame felt his heart beating fast. He whispered under his breath, "What is this?" as sweat gathered on his forehead. The air around him felt heavier, and the sounds of the farm grew distant. It was as though the world was pulling him into those eyes, forcing him to see something he was not ready for. He stumbled back suddenly, rubbing his face with his hands, trying to shake the image away. But when he looked again, the patterns were still there, slowly moving like a secret message hidden in plain sight. He wanted to call Adwoa, his wife, but his voice stuck in his throat. Something inside him warned that what he was witnessing was not for everyone to see. Kwame kept staring into the goat's eyes, unable to look away. The strange patterns that had been moving inside were no longer just random shapes. They were arranging themselves slowly, carefully, as though an unseen hand was writing on water. His chest grew tight as he leaned closer, afraid yet unable to stop himself. Then, right before his eyes, the letters became clear. His heart stopped when he saw his own name written in the goat's left eye, Kwame. The letters were sharp and bright, floating like fire inside the blackness of the animal's gaze. He staggered back, nearly falling to the ground. His hands trembled, and his breath came out in short gasps. "No, this is not real," he whispered to himself, shaking his head. But when he dared to look again, the name was still there, steady and clear. Fear wrapped around him like cold water. How could a goat, an ordinary creature, hold his name inside its eye? Who could have placed it there? Was this witchcraft, or some curse sent to destroy him? He rubbed his face hard, hoping it was only his tired imagination, but when he opened his eyes, the letters glowed brighter. The goat tilted its head, as if mocking him, as if it knew the power of what he had just seen. Kwame's knees weakened, and he dropped onto the dirt floor. His mind raced with questions he could not answer. Did someone in the village want to harm him? Was this animal carrying a message from the spirits? The silence of the yard pressed heavily on him. Even the chickens and birds seemed to have gone quiet, as though the world itself was watching. The goat took a step closer, its gaze never leaving him. Kwame could not move, could not speak. He felt as if the letters in that eye were carved into his soul, binding him to a fate he did not understand. Deep inside, he knew his life would never be the same again. That night Kwame could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of the goat's left eye returned, glowing with his name. He turned from side to side on his mat, his body restless, his mind burning with fear. At last, sleep caught him, but it was not peaceful. In his dream, he heard his name being called. The voices were soft at first, almost like the wind, but then they grew clearer. Kwame. Kwame. His eyes opened in the dream and he found himself standing in the middle of his yard. But the night sky above him was darker than usual, filled with heavy clouds. Around him stood goats, dozens of them, their glowing eyes fixed on him. They moved in a slow circle, their mouths opening as they all called his name in one voice. His skin crawled as the sound grew louder, echoing like thunder in his head. Suddenly, the goats began walking toward the forest. Without understanding why, Kwame's legs moved to follow them. The deeper he went into the forest, the darker it became. The trees stretched tall, their branches like arms trying to grab him. The goats walked ahead in silence now, only their glowing eyes showing him the path. When they stopped, he found himself in a clearing where the air felt heavy, almost impossible to breathe. The goats surrounded him again, this time whispering in low voices. The whispers rose and fell like chants, but he could not understand the language. It was strange, old, and haunting, yet his name kept appearing between the words. Sweat dripped down his face as he clutched his chest, trying to steady his heart. He tried to speak, to ask them what they wanted, but his voice made no sound. The whispers grew faster, sharper, like secrets meant to be kept from human ears. He covered his ears, but the voices were already inside his head. Just before he could collapse, he woke up on his mat, gasping for air. His body was wet with sweat, and his heart still pounded as if he had truly walked that dark forest. The next morning Kwame could not keep his fear inside any longer. His hands shook as he worked on the farm, and every sound made him look over his shoulder. At last, he decided to share what was troubling him. He went to see his childhood friend Kojo, the one person he trusted with his secrets. They sat under a mango tree, and Kwame's voice was low as he told him everything. The strange goat that refused to eat, the moving patterns in its eyes, and finally how his own name had appeared there. Kojo's face grew pale as he listened. He shook his head and warned Kwame never to repeat such a story aloud, but it was already too late. That evening, a woman who had passed near the trees saw them speaking with worried faces. She carried the news to her neighbor, and before nightfall, whispers had begun to spread like wildfire across the village. People gathered in small groups, their voices low but filled with fear. Some said Kwame had been chosen by spirits, others claimed he was under a curse placed by an enemy. By the next day, the story had reached nearly every corner of the village. Children pointed at him as he passed, women hushed their voices when he walked by, and men shook their heads in pity. Everywhere Kwame went, he could feel eyes following him, just like the goat's unblinking gaze. Rumors grew darker as people began to say he had been marked for death, that the spirits had already claimed his name and were only waiting for the right moment to take his life. His wife Adwoa heard the whispers too, and her eyes filled with tears each time she looked at him. She begged him to get rid of the goat, but Kwame knew it would not be so simple. The story had left his hands, and now the whole village carried it in their mouths. Fear had escaped into the air, and Kwame felt trapped, like prey surrounded by hunters he could not see. Adwoa could no longer hide her fear. Each night she saw her husband tossing on the mat, sweating and gasping from terrible dreams, and each morning she heard new whispers from the villagers. The goat had become a shadow in their home. It stood in the pen, silent, its strange eyes always following Kwame, and the sight of it filled her heart with dread. One evening, when the sky was red with sunset, she knelt before Kwame and begged him with trembling hands, "Please, let this goat leave our home. It is not an ordinary animal. It will destroy us if we keep it." Kwame wanted to agree, but a heavy fear held him back. Still, to calm her, he decided to sell it. The next market day, a man came to see the goat. He examined it and was ready to pay, but as soon as he stretched his hand toward the rope, the goat opened its mouth and let out a scream. It was not the cry of an animal. It was sharp, high, and human, echoing through the compound like the wail of a dying person. The man dropped the rope and ran without looking back. The same thing happened again and again. Each time someone came to buy it, the goat released that terrible scream, freezing their hearts and chasing them away. Soon, no one in the village dared to come near it. Children cried when they passed by Kwame's compound, and neighbors crossed to the other side of the path. Adwoa's fear grew worse. She could not eat or sleep, for she felt the goat's presence was a curse placed upon their family. She clutched her husband's arm, pleading with tears in her eyes. "Kwame, if we do not remove it, something bad will happen. Can't you see it is holding us prisoner?" But Kwame had no answer. Each attempt to get rid of the goat had failed, and he now felt trapped. The creature refused to leave, as if it had chosen him, and its unblinking eyes told him the nightmare was only beginning. When fear became too heavy for the household, Adwoa insisted they call Nanaquaku, the old herbalist known for his wisdom in dealing with strange matters. The villagers respected him, for he had spent his life studying herbs, spirits, and the hidden ways of the land. When Nanaquaku arrived at Kwami's compound, his steps were slow but firm, his walking stick tapping against the ground. He asked to be left alone with the goat, and though Kwami hesitated, he obeyed. The old man stood before the animal, his wrinkled face calm but watchful. He studied its eyes closely, whispering old words under his breath as if speaking to unseen forces. The goat did not move. It only stared back at him with the same unblinking gaze it had given Kwami since the first day. After a long silence, Nanaquaku stepped back and sighed heavily. His expression had changed, his face dark with worry. He called Kwami and Adwoa closer. His voice was low but carried the weight of truth. This goat is not an ordinary beast. It carries a curse placed with strong powers. The name in its eyes is no accident. It was written to bind your life. This animal has been sent to take you, Kwami. The word struck like a knife. Kwami felt his chest tighten, and Adwoa gasped, covering her mouth in shock. Nanaquaku explained further, saying the goat was a vessel used in dark rituals, meant to draw strength from the life of its chosen victim. The spirits tied to it will not rest until they take what they came for, he said. Adwoa's hands shook as she clutched her husband's arm, pleading with the herbalist to save him. But Nanaquaku shook his head. It will not be easy. Whoever placed this curse knew what they were doing. If we do not act quickly, Kwami's life will be cut short. The air grew colder around them as his words sank in. For the first time, Kwami realized the goat was not just a strange burden, it was death itself, waiting patiently for him. That night, Kwami could not find rest. Nanaquaku's words kept echoing in his mind, and every creak of the wooden walls made his heart jump. The air felt heavy, and the silence of the compound was unnatural, as though even the night creatures were afraid to make a sound. Lying on his mat, Kwami suddenly heard soft footsteps outside. At first, he thought it was just the wind stirring the dry leaves, but the sound grew clearer, slow, deliberate steps circling his house. His blood ran cold. He sat up and called out softly, but no one answered. Gathering courage, he stepped outside with a lantern in his hand. The pen where the goat was kept stood empty. The rope that tied it was loose on the ground, as if cut by invisible hands. Kwami's chest tightened. He turned slowly, and that was when he saw it, the goat standing at his doorstep, waiting for him. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, brighter than the lantern he carried. His breath caught as the animal raised its head, and then, to his horror, he heard it. A whisper. His name. Kwami. The sound was soft but clear, as if spoken by human lips. He froze, his legs trembling so badly he thought he would collapse. Again the goat whispered, dragging out his name, each syllable heavy with unseen power. Kwami's lantern flickered, and the night grew colder around him. He stumbled back, his heart pounding in his ears. The goat stepped closer, its hooves making no sound on the ground, its glowing eyes locked on him. He wanted to shout for Adwoa, but his voice was trapped in his throat. The whispers grew louder, echoing not just outside but inside his head. His vision blurred, and the world seemed to tilt as fear swallowed him whole. In that moment, Kwami knew the curse was no longer hiding. It had come to claim him, and the goat was no longer just an animal, it was the shadow of death standing at his door. Nanaquaku knew there was no time to waste. The next day he returned with herbs, ashes, and a small drum, telling Kwami and Adwoa that the goat must be destroyed before it claimed his life. His voice was stern as he gave the instructions. It must be burned at the midnight crossroads, the place where four paths meet. Only there can the curse be broken. Fearful but desperate, Kwami agreed. That night, under the heavy silence of the moonless sky, they carried the goat to the crossroads. The villagers who had heard the story followed from a distance, too afraid to come close yet unable to stay away. The air was tense, the night wind biting cold against their skin. Nanaquaku arranged dry wood in a circle and sprinkled his herbs over it, chanting old words that no one else understood. The goat stood in the center, strangely calm, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. Kwami's heart pounded as he helped pour oil on the wood. When Nanaquaku struck the fire, the flames leapt high, crackling with fierce energy. For a moment, it seemed the ritual was working. But then the goat raised its head, and the sound that came from its mouth froze every soul present. Kwami. It was not the cry of an animal, it was his name, spoken in a chilling human voice that echoed through the night. The villagers gasped and stepped back, some covering their ears, others clutching their chests. The flames roared higher, wrapping around the animal, but still it cried out his name, louder and louder, as if mocking him even in the fire. Kwame fell to his knees, trembling, unable to bear the weight of the sound. Adwoa clung to him, her tears streaming as she prayed silently. Nana Kwaku's chants grew stronger, his voice rising to drown out the goat's cries. Finally, as the fire consumed it completely, the voice broke into a long, haunting wail and then fell silent. The crossroads grew quiet again, but the fear in everyone's hearts remained, for they had witnessed something no mortal eyes were meant to see. When the fire finally burned out, the villagers gathered around the smoking pile of ashes. The night air was still, and no one dared to speak. Kwame's hands were trembling as he stared into the remains of the goat, praying it was all over. But then Nana Kwaku stepped closer, his old eyes narrowing. He pointed at the ashes with his staff. Slowly, the people leaned forward, and a chill passed through the crowd. Clear shapes were forming in the black dust, lines bending and curling until they created a pattern. Kwame's breath caught when he saw it, his own name written again, this time in the ashes left by the fire. His knees grew weak, and Adwoa gripped his arm tightly, whispering prayers under her breath. The villagers gasped, some covering their mouths in shock, others stepping back in fear. Nana Kwaku's voice was heavy as he explained. This curse was not random. It was placed with intention. Someone close to you wanted your life, Kwame. Someone who knows your name, your path, and your blood. Kwame's heart sank. He looked around at the faces of the villagers, wondering who among them could wish him dead. He thought of friends, neighbors, even distant relatives, and the weight of betrayal pressed hard on his chest. Adwoa's eyes filled with tears as she clung to him, realizing that danger had come from near, not far. The villagers whispered to one another, shaken by the revelation. They had seen with their own eyes how dark powers could take the form of something so ordinary, hiding behind the face of a simple goat. That night, they left the crossroads with fear but also with a lesson carved deep in their hearts. Evil does not always wear the face of a monster. Sometimes it hides in silence, waiting in the most innocent places, even in the eyes of an animal. For Kwame, the truth was heavier than the curse itself, but he knew one thing clearly: he had been saved from death, yet the shadow of betrayal would never leave him.